You've lucked out and received a request from an agent or producer. So what can you do to avoid having your script end up here? The trash. Hi all, Hank from Right to Real here. This topic started in our forums as a list of don'ts, became an article on 6 sins of screenwriting, went back to the forum with members adding a few more examples, and here we are. Like always, this isn't a be-all end-all type list, but it does contain quite a few common problems we've seen in both pro and amateur scripts alike. Coming in at number 10, humor that isn't funny. Big, huge, epic problem. If you're writing a comedy, make sure it's funny, but the same can go for other genres too. Anytime you try to lighten the mood, make sure your joke lands. Since comedy is subjective, try to find a sampling of people that vary and read them your dialogue or situation. If most laugh, then you're onto something. If none laugh, you've got a problem. This is a big issue for me, and one of the reasons I don't write comedies, because stuff that's funny to me is either in the moment or not funny to others. Will some of the comedy depend on the delivery of the actor? Yes, but the actor is not synonymous with miracle worker, making something out of nothing. It's important that the seed of funny is sown into your story so she or he has something to work with. Coming in at number 9, typos. The single easiest problem to solve. A reader will forgive a few of them, but once you've had more than say 5, your reader's beginning to focus on grammar. Now he's wondering more about your upbringing than what's happening to your character. Not to mention, typos signify that you didn't spend the time properly editing your story. If your story isn't important enough to you to fix these little issues, why should it be important to your reader? Number 8, plot insufficiency. When we start writing, we generally have a collection of great scenes in our mind's eye. These are the scenes that give our fingers the reason to clickety-clack away at the keyboard. The problem arises when we don't have enough to get us from point A to point B in our story. Plot needs to be there, and it needs to escalate. Call this a 3-act structure, Blake's Beat, whatever you want. There's meat to a story that we must include, or it won't matter how good any individual scene is, the audience attention span was lost. Cool visuals can't stand on their own. Number 7, a fade-out that is long overdue. Think The Return of the King, but the book. This is the perfect example of not knowing when to call it quits. Some might argue the movie as well, but if you read the book, then you know what I'm talking about. In the original narrative, the hobbits don't return to a perfect shire. There was a whole mini-story wedged into the ending, requiring our 4 hairy-footed heroes to fight Sharky and his men to free their imprisoned hobbit brethren. My point, don't drag your story out. When things are finished, stop writing. Nothing will piss a reader off or an audience off more than when your ending drones on for 10 plus pages or 15 plus minutes. Want to know the best time to end your story? End it early. Wrap the main plot up and leave them wondering how a few of the minor issues ended up. This fact is why sequels get made. Number 6, episodic structure. This has to do with a character stumbling through what feels like random events. Your scenes need to be driven by the engine of your story, and all work towards the goal of your character. If you don't do that, your protagonist will more or less be going from one random thing to another, some of which may be cool scenes, but cool isn't enough. The scenes need to serve a purpose in your story, tying the plot together. Be honest with yourself here, asking if each scene really adds to your tale. It's there because I wrote it that way is not a good answer. Number 5, one-dimensional characters. Characters need depth. They need to feel like real people when we get a glimpse into this brief 110 pages of their lives. If we can't feel for or identify with your characters, it doesn't matter how many things blow up, people die, or treasures are won. We won't care. The more you know your characters, where they came from, what type of personalities they have, their relationship to other characters, etc., the better your script will be. Some suggestions on character development were in last week's video. The link is in the top right under the info button. Overtext, number 4. Subtext is an awesome thing to have in a script. Most of us strive for it, and our reader or our audience is getting clued into our story without even realizing it. Unfortunately, once we accomplish the subtext, we still feel the need to spell things out for the reader. This is what I mean by overtext. Readers are smart, and if we do our jobs properly, they'll read between the lines. No need to explain an action or emotion, simply use a little finesse. Hints, implication, subtext. Let's look at an example. Interior, kitchen, night. Dan washes the dishes as Carol removes plates from the table. He smiles and kisses her as she drops the last one off, but Carol looks uneasy. Mom called today. His smile evaporates. And? She still wants to move in with us. He stops, drying off his hands. I don't want her here. But she's my mother. And she can go to a home. I hate you. Carol storms out, leaving Dan to his dishes. Now let's take a look and see if we can't add a little bit of subtext. Interior, kitchen, night. Dan washes the dishes as Carol removes plates from the table. He smiles and kisses her as she drops the last one off, but Carol looks uneasy. Mom called earlier. Dan's smile quickly evaporates. Has she talked to your brother? They don't have the room. He dries his hands, looking at her. And we do? We have an entire guest room, not to mention Tom's going to college, both of which are upstairs. She needs proper facilities. Carol stands her ground. She's my mother. Can we talk about this tomorrow? Sure. Carol heads towards the door. Where are you going? What about the movie? My head hurts. I'm going to bed. She exits, leaving him to his chores. In the first example, Dan doesn't want Carol's mother coming to live with him. He comes right out and he says it very bluntly. In the second example, we use a little bit of subtext. He still hints at that. He still gets the objective that he wants in this part of the discussion, but Carol kind of hints that this isn't over and that she's not exactly happy with Dan. Number 3, exposition. This one's kind of a no-brainer. Whether it's the Pope in the pool technique, distracting us while dumping crucial information or not, exposition tends to slow a script down. Sometimes it's vitally important to our story, and without it a reader is lost, but even then we need to keep it as short and interesting as possible. Always ask, can I show this information rather than have a character explain it? However, there are exposition exceptions, stress on the exception part, like visually complex stories, similar to Inception, where the world being presented during the exposition dump is so unique we just can't turn away. But unless your name is Chris Nolan, then there's a 99.99999% chance producers and actors like Mr. DiCaprio are not going to take the time to sit down with you and wrap their minds around your story. So you'll need to be very creative when unveiling large amounts of information. Number 2, over-description. This is where the beauty of inferring comes in to avoid any and all insurmountable walls of text. We don't need to see each individual action performed by a character. We should only be including the actions that are vital to the plot. Anything else muddles the story and/or bores your reader. Plus, why write it all out when our minds will naturally assume most of this stuff happened anyway? Here's an example. Exterior, parking lot, night. Bob exits the building and walks up to his car. He takes his keys out of his pocket, unlocks the door, opens it, gets inside and shuts the door behind him. Keys in the ignition, he starts the car, puts it in gear, and finally drives off. Headlights flash on and an eerie black sedan follows him at a distance. This is all a little too much. All of these actions can be summed up with 1 or 2 simple lines. Let's try the next part. Exterior, parking lot, night. Bob gets in his car and pulls out of the parking lot in a cloud of dust. Headlights flash on and an eerie black sedan follows him at a distance. See, the key here is that Bob got in his car and drove off and that someone was following him. We're not sure who, that all depends on the story. But we don't need to show each individual action of him getting into the car because it's really not important. Like I said earlier, our mind will just naturally assume stuff like that happens. And coming in at number 1, mundane dialogue. Believe it or not, you'll still read this in proscripts. And the tip to remember here, enter late and leave early. Some examples of mundane. Hi, how are you? I'm good, you? I'm great, thanks. Bye. Take care. Are exchanges like this common in our everyday lives? Certainly, but remember, we don't pay to watch our everyday lives. Remember, we should always be entering a scene after these pleasantries have been exchanged and leaving before the goodbyes are started. Here's a quick exchange I wrote up. The second part, I tried to add a little bit of subtext. Interior, break room, day. Matt sits at a table, reading the newspaper in between the occasional sip of coffee. Donna enters, requiring her own caffeine intake. Hi, Matt. He looks up. Hey, Donna, how are you? Good. She grabs a mug and pours herself a cup. Be at the meeting later? Sure will. She heads towards the door. Well, see you there. Okay. She leaves. He goes back to his paper. Now, this is an example of the mundane dialogue I was talking about, and also is probably a scene that you could cut from your script. Interior, break room, day. Matt sits at a table, reading the newspaper in between the occasional sip of coffee. Donna enters, requiring her own caffeine intake. Didn't think I'd find you in here. He doesn't look up from his paper. I'm ready. She pours herself a cup of coffee. Let's hope so. They're our biggest client. He looks up, staring daggers. Enjoy the rest of your day, Donna. She smiles back, a toothy smile that wants her to devour him. Good luck, Matt. He watches her leave. His face lets it slip that he may not be as ready as he said. Now here the subtext was there was something going on between Donna and Matt, competition for a promotion, whatever. I even used some of those same kind of mundane lines to add a little bit of subtext based on how the characters would deliver them. But anytime you start a character's dialogue with something like, well, hi, how are you? Consider editing these things out. They're unnecessary, they're mundane, and they'll really slow down your story. Okay, so those are some of the screenwriting sins you should avoid in or edit out of your own writing. Did we miss any other problems? Let us know in the comments. Subscribe if you found this video helpful, and then join us on our site for deeper discussions in screenwriting at write2real.com. Oh, and remember, write your butts off.